defines ambition for me. Ambition.
My name is Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today, a podcast show discussing with other entrepreneurial and ambitious people what it means to achieve success, grow your startup, accomplish your goals, and try to change the world today. On episode 11, we are joined by Justin Dombrowski, principal at Historiocity. Historiocity focuses on consulting in fintech, including how innovations in blockchain technology can transform the financial services, mobile banking, and Internet of Things, all the way from emerging markets to establishing industries. Ambition Today is now a partner with the New York Startup Founder 101. Join thousands of other entrepreneurs by joining New York Startup Founder 101 on meetup.com. If you're in New York City, be sure to check out one of our events and come say hi. Today's episode of Ambition Today is brought to you by Audible.com. Visit audibletrial.com/Ambition Today to download and keep any audiobook for free. This is Ambition Today.
Looking to make your dreams come true? Needing that extra push to become more successful? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Ambition Today with your host, Kevin Siskar.
What's up, world? You are listening to this episode of Ambition Today, and I am your host, Kevin Siskar. You can find me on Twitter at @thesiskar and online at www.siskar.co, which is the home of Ambition Today, along with constant new posts. On today's episode, we are joined by Justin Dombrowski, principal at Historiocity. Historiocity focuses on consulting in fintech, including how innovations in blockchain technology can transform the financial services, mobile banking, and Internet of Things, from emerging markets to established industries. Justin is also previously a co-founder of Solatus Mutual, a metals-based financial products company, and he is also an academic with, honestly, more degrees from more prestigious universities than I could count. But we're going to unpack and get to all that today. Justin, welcome to Ambition Today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we're here at the, as always, incredible offices at NextJump. It's December, and it's still mid to high 50s. What is that about?
You know, the funny thing is that a week and a half ago, I went away to London, and before I'd left, I just purchased a brand new winter coat, expecting that all the weather in New York would get really cold and all of this. And then I go away to London. I took my really crappy, decrepit winter coat with me there, and it served its purpose right there. And then by the time I got back home off the flight, the airline, the pilot ended up telling us that the weather was 68 degrees outside in New York. And I was sitting there, you know, cold in the airplane with this thick wool coat on my lap thinking like, no, what am I going to do with this stupid thing? Because it wasn't going to actually fit in my suitcase. And now that I'd bought this brand new coat also that's back home, should I return the thing? The weather's been absolutely incredible.
I know. It's honestly, like, I've spent my whole life, I grew up in Buffalo, I live in New York City. Now I've spent most of my life in New York State. This is not normal.
Yeah, I'm from Michigan. And it's kind of been the case that over the last, 20 years or so, that the time at which, the smaller lakes in this state would freeze over has been moving later and later and later. And I remember at points when I'd played golf and things like that on December 31st, but nothing anywhere close to this.
Well, we can talk weather all day, but so I'm excited to get into a few things today. As I mentioned, you have a ton of education. You're also one of the most knowledgeable and experts in Bitcoin, blockchain, all that crypto technology. And then you're also very involved in fintech, financial technology, fintech for short. Mm-hmm. So let's start with education. Did you like school before college and while you were growing up?
I liked learning a lot. So I didn't really like school for the most part growing up. Matter of fact, up until I was probably in the 8th grade, I loathed it. I didn't do very well in it. And it wasn't really until, I think probably the middle of my 8th grade year where I realized that, you know what, it wasn't so much the schooling that I liked. It was rifling through coursework and course material. And pretty much over the next couple of years, I graduated a couple years early. And it was mainly because I realized that I could work through this stuff really fast. I was really good at it, adept at picking up brand new content. And it was at that point when I realized, my problem was not with school. My problem was that I wanted independence into being able to do this stuff on my own. And along the ride, I realized, I'm just going to then see if I can go all the way to the top. I wanted to be the best at something. And I think by the time I was 14 years old, I decided, you know what, I want to do a PhD. And so like pretty much every decision in school was at some point a service to that.
To get to that point.
To get to that point.
Okay.
In what I wasn't quite sure. I mean, I thought it was physics, obviously, in the beginning, but that changed.
And you worked to that point. So this is actually going to be a mouthful, but I'm going to just do a quick recap of your schooling.
Oh boy.
So University of Michigan, bachelor's in physics, then Westminster Theological Seminary, a master's in biblical studies, and then after that, a master's in ancient Judaism. After that, another master's in classical studies from Columbia University. Then you went to Columbia for your PhD, and then you were also a professor at Columbia. You were also a research fellow at the Università di Pavia in Italy, and you're also a research collaborator in the University of Oxford in England. And I think there was a few other smaller positions, but I think, is there anything I'm missing there?
No, that's basically right. I mean, I wasn't a professor. I was a lecturer at Columbia, which is kind of an important distinction because, I was not on a tenure track or anything like that. But yeah, and the funny thing is about in that long, torturous career path there's a lot of stuff that's also missing too. So for example, I decided after physics I was really interested in more human stuff, so I ended up doing religious studies. That led me to Columbia, but while I was in Columbia, I pretty much did none of that. Most of my education, even though I had to take some classical related courses, was all economic history. So like if you took a look at my PhD, like the comp exams that you have to take, all of that stuff was in econ history, demography, stuff like that. So it was all about like trying to figure out like what kind of things best explained the world that I was interested in explaining.
Okay.
So
and then as a result, you're specialized in social and economic histories of European and Middle Eastern states, the relationships between capital markets, fiscal policy, and economic growth.
Yep.
So why so much formal education? Was it to get to that PhD, that goal you'd set at 14, or?
Yeah, I mean, like it wasn't the case that, along the path I was thinking, my goal is just to do what I wanted to do since I was 14. It was, I really wanted to be extremely knowledgeable about certain things, and the ordinary career path, the one that I was exposed to and that everybody's exposed to, and then the one that is kind of in a way forced down their throats by culture, is you go to college, you go do other degrees, and you do what the institutions tell you that they want you to do. It wasn't until really quite a bit later, even when I was involved in my first startup, also in graduate school, where I realized that actually, what do I really want to do? I want to lead thought development. I want to change the way people think and behave. And in order to do that, actually being in a university is probably not the best place to be. Despite the fact that most academics tend to think that we have an awful lot of influence in the world around us. In reality, we have influence over the students who then kind of forget about us the moment they leave. And really, I found that I was able to, even kind of being involved in Founders Institute, right? I have much more influence over how, people interact with their companies, the way they interact with their customers and all that other kind of stuff was much more rewarding and much more powerful. And, so yeah, I realized that the best way to actually be the kind of person that I thought I wanted to be when I was 14 was to actually leave the ivory tower and start working in the real world and developing my name there. In other words,
so I'm getting the feeling that curiosity has been a theme throughout your life.
Definitely.
And satisfying curiosity. How important do you think curiosity is and feeding your own curiosity is towards success and getting to where you want to go?
I think being a curious person, but then also being able to manage your curiosity are two vital things.
Can you break that apart a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, yes, you're right. Like, you have a great idea, you want to implement it, right? It's important to be struck from your core as a person to want to understand the kinds of problems that you want to solve at the deepest level. And if your goal is to build a company, to understand the needs of your potential customers or investors, as a case may be, or whatever, right? The world around you. But at the same time, you need to be able to manage when to stop that exercise. Because part of the problem, even with me, is I like to refer to myself as a recovering academic because I could just go and I could just study a particular problem and then never come up for air. I have to know when to pause and curious people have to know when to pause so that they know, okay, I know enough to know that this is enough to make the kind of decision I need to move to the next step.
So pausing to make a decision and then execute on the knowledge you've gained.
Yeah. It's a trial and error process, right? You need to figure out what is the right amount of information you need to know, then course correct as the case may be.
Right. And I think that's an interesting thing you bring up, because I don't know if that was an issue until recently. I could drink information forever because there's the internet and I have access to everything.
Yeah.
It used to just be like you were lucky if you learned what you learned and you could put it to work.
Yeah.
Now you can just, go to
There's
school
no
forever
end.
and read forever and yeah.
As my career path would kind of indicate. You can stay in school forever.
So I wanted to ask you, now that you're a history buff with all these degrees.
Sure.
Does history repeat itself, and how useful is knowing about the past when you're approaching the future? This kind of goes into acting on information you've acquired.
Right.
It's kind of good follow-up to the last.
So I kind of feel like whenever people ask that question, like, does history repeat itself? Usually what they mean is, if I study history well enough, can I predict the future? Or can I anticipate certain kinds of events happening again, and then as a result take advantage of them or protect myself or whatever the case may be. And I think the answer to that question is that way of thinking usually only works well in hindsight. In other words, it's usually difficult when you're in the middle of an event that actually looks like something in the past to recognize that you're in something that sort of feels like it's repeated. And the reason why is because oftentimes the parallels are more superficial than real. And so like you can draw the comparisons and whatnot, but at the end of the day, for example, you could look at something like the 2007-2008 financial crisis, and you can draw parallels to earlier historical events of financial crises that are credit dependent or depend on real estate. As a matter of fact, I used to use one from antiquity because there's one that happened under the Emperor Tiberius in the 30s AD that looks very, very similar. And people always ask, like, did that teach you anything? And the answer is, well, no, because superficially they're very similar, but the golden thread is that it's not so much that history repeats itself, it's that certain kinds of human behaviors repeat themselves, and the social conditions or the economic conditions or the particular behaviors that make those repetitions happen, you can only really see if you're really, really up close. So the kinds of people that were able to predict things like the crisis were the kinds of people who were in the back offices looking at the balance sheets and thinking like, oh my God, we were so heading for a train wreck. Not the people who were doing the comparison, in other words. So I guess in answer to your question... No, yeah, go ahead.
I love that you bring that up because my degree is in cognitive neuroscience. So when you go... The human behaviors that repeat themselves, because humans are humans for the last few million years, that's what creates the golden threads and the echoes that we try to draw the strings between.
Right.
But understanding those core human behaviors from the outset is actually the best way. Is that what you're saying? To
kind of, yeah. So
understand what's happening in history.
So there's this one ancient writer, a guy named Polybius, for example, who has this thing he calls the anakyclosis. And what the anakyclosis is an explanation of how different kinds of governmental systems evolve into one another and then back to square one, from a basic kind of society to like having a monarch to having something like a democracy, then oligarchs on top, and then things just kind of collapse because things become too top heavy and people on the bottom get mad. And what's interesting about the argument that he observes there is that he's not talking about how history repeats itself. He's talking about how groups of people interact with one another, right? It's about, the explanation is deeply social. Yeah, it's deeply social. It's deeply relational. It's not like, it's not that history repeats itself by itself. It's much more explanatory, much more basic than that.
I think that you're in the heat on. We had some pipes banging a little bit there.
Clank. Yeah.
All right, so there's all this information out there. What is the value of higher education as the internet and the amount of free information increases? You can go get the experiences easier at lower prices. What do you think the value of higher education is?
Yeah, and I think what you really mean is formal education, like in a university, right? Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. And I think, right now you're watching the margins of higher education shrink, right? Schools, the best way they're thinking about trying to increase them is by either raising tuition or other costs, or creating MOOCs to lower overhead and create these distance learning programs and things like that. And then none of them are really working out, right? But part of the reason they're doing them is they're all also kind of realizing that the nature of what learning is supposed to be and what it's for has also changed. It used to be the case, like when you and I went to college, for instance, right? Everybody kind of went to college because that's what you do after high school, and it didn't matter necessarily whether you got specific kind of professional education, although that was your parents probably wished you would. It mattered that the way they envisioned that it shapes the way you think as a person. And increasingly, what we're seeing is, well, insofar as education has become incredibly expensive, that's no longer a sufficient condition to go, right? And so, what does that really mean? It means that people really only want to go to these kinds of schools if either A, somebody's paying for it, B, it gets them to somewhere that they really need to go. So, for instance, if you want to work in investment banking right now, it matters less, what you learned than what your grades were and where you went to school. And in matter of fact, you talk to any of the investment bankers on Wall Street, and they'll say, "Hey, how much did I actually learn in college?" And the answer was not very much. I had to learn everything on the job. Sort of, kind of an indictment about the whole procedure,
you hear that
right?
over and over.
Yeah, you do.
Everyone in the workforce.
And so what does that really say? In answer to your question, higher education, in my opinion, matters less and less on its own. Because it's producing a product for people that they can't immediately translate on aggregate into their own professional careers. And as a matter of fact, has to be supplemented by their jobs from day one anyway. And I think what that means is that the value of MOOCs and the success of institutions like General Assembly or Founders Institute sort of says that people need to round out whatever they've been learning with actual practical skills. And it's all this other stuff that we provide that's much better for them if they actually want to get a job or keep it or do something brand new. And
I think that's truer the farther up the pipeline you go, right? Like a bachelor's degree and an associate's degree have replaced high school. That's a stamp you almost need to just even get your resume in the door to get hired. Yeah. Master's degree is debatable, and a PhD is maybe.
And it also depends on what we're talking about, right? So if in my case, right,
or it's a tracked thing,
right,
it's required, etc. We're not talking.
Yeah,
about
you want to run a lab, you better have a PhD.
Right.
In my case, was it going to help me with my own work? The answer is, well, you could make a case that having a PhD sounds really cool and it'll grant me credibility. But here's the kicker. I have not found a single person that gives a damn about any of that, even where I went to school, except for that it sounds professional. At the end of the day, all they care about is that I understand my material, that I do a good job, that I'm the smartest guy in the room. Case in point, someone who's in our field who never we have several people, a number of people who in my world that never went to college or didn't finish college, but they're the top of the game, and everybody recognizes they're the top dog. And that, at the end of the day, is what matters.
So I don't necessarily want to communicate the message that people shouldn't go to college. I think the message needs to be that people need to keep investing in themselves and keep educating themselves. Where they get that information is debatable. So what message do you have if to people that are in that toss up, what do I do? Like, I mean, you have to have, if you're not going to go to college or you're not going to get that master's degree, like that doesn't mean like you can just go get the job. It means you have to go hustle to get that information and knowledge elsewhere.
You're right. It means that what it means is that from day one, you need to have thought through where do you want to go and how are you going to get there. Now, if you expect that you're going to walk into a business development job at a really good startup the moment you graduated from college, unless it's that startup that you were involved in creating from day one, it's not very likely because you don't have anything. You have to have somebody who's willing to bet on you for some other reason. In which case you needed to have started either somewhere else at some lower level job, or you needed to have gone to college, usually as sort of like some basic level credentials. Now, for the people who've actually maybe not gone to college but have been able to obtain some BD chops, they'll have a much easier time moving up the ladder, even though they might not have the college background because they've been able to demonstrate their abilities in other ways. And increasingly, I even know people at prominent financial institutions in New York who don't have college backgrounds, and the reason why is because of that. They've done really, really well for themselves, and they're exceptional people.
They made it happen for themselves.
They made it happen,
didn't fall in their lap.
but you have to be that kind of person.
Right.
You have to be like, I'm just going to go do this. I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do. I'm not going to wait for anybody to sort of like lift me up. I'm going to earn it. But it's a special disposition.
That's an important message.
Yeah.
So then Solidus Mutual, how did that come about?
So some friends of mine.
There, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it wasn't a long-lived thing, but some friends of mine, one guy who is part of a hedge fund, another guy who is a developer, a graduate student, formerly a graduate student, I guess, at in Columbia in computer science, but then went on to work at a hedge fund as a technologist. We'd worked together on, this is, post 2007, 2008. We were thinking about interest in precious metals and the economy more generally, and ways we could possibly leverage these interests to make some money, create some cool products. And, the company's still going. I'm no longer directly affiliated with it. I advise them at various points. Okay. But for me, the most important thing about it was that it was my first experience ever thinking about seriously working with an early stage company. And so for me, after that, I kind of caught the bug. I sort of realized, oh, I love this. Matter of fact, it was better for me than graduate school because unlike graduate school where I was researching either dead people or people I didn't know, these were real world problems right in front of me. I had more data at my disposal than I would have otherwise, and I could actually do something.
You can reach out and touch.
So yeah, I mean, basically what I realized, and this gets back to the earlier point about me and what did I really want to do when I was 14, like coming to the realization that the same kinds of problems that I'd like to solve, the same sort of things that kept me interested and kept me curious, I found more fulfilling solving these modern problems than I did dealing with my academic ones. And so for me, that was really valuable.
I like
so
it.
It kind of set my. So I'm incredibly grateful for that earlier opportunity because it definitely set my direction to where I am now.
So after Solidus, you are now consulting with Historiocity,
right?
Focused on fintech. So we're after the break here. I want to get into fintech, blockchain, Bitcoin, Internet of Things, the future of the financial technology industry. So I want to just before we jump into all that. Break down a few terms because I know it's kind of a heavy jargon session. So, real quick, and I'm talking like a sentence or two on each of these high level. How would you explain Bitcoin?
So, make it really simple.
Yes.
All Bitcoin and this blockchain is a way to move money peer to peer, from me to you, without any intermediary financial institution.
Without a bank.
Without a bank, without a payment processor per se. I'm oversimplifying, but there's other stuff going on there. But the idea basically is that I can send money to you without anybody just simply skimming off the top or some bank sitting in the middle doing all the regulatory work. And in fact, if I wanted to, if for some reason you and I had reasons to do business and not want to know who the counterparties were, we could keep it functionally anonymous.
Okay.
Or
so
pseudo-anonymous.
It can be anonymous, doesn't have to be.
More or less. I mean, or very difficult to track. And
okay. So I think that's good. And then the Internet of Things. We're going to talk about that a little bit. How would you explain that?
Internet of Things is a term that's kind of come up in the last couple of years that really just refers to how different devices can connect to one another, share information with one another, everything from notifications to sending orders to...
Can you give some examples?
The connected home that everybody's talking about these days is one grand example of what we mean by Internet of Things, having doors that are, connected to your, a key fob that tells it that when proximity is near, it automatically unlocks. It knows that you've entered in. It can start the music that you want for the playlist for the day, turn on the heat.
So smart thermostats,
all that kind of stuff is part of the same story. Yeah.
Okay. And there's going to be more devices online than humans eventually.
Right.
So, all right, cool. So let's take a quick partner break. After the break, I want to get more in depth about Bitcoin. We're going to talk a little about Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder of Bitcoin, who no one knows who he is. He's secret and hidden. And then what's going on with fintech, and then the Ambition Today question of the day, and more. So we'll be right back.
They gon' love me for my ambition. Easy to dream a dream, though it's harder to live it.
This is Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar. We'll be right back.
Today's partner of Ambition Today is, of course, Audible.com. Visit audibletrial.com/ambition today to download and keep any audiobook for free. Justin, do you use Audible?
Yeah, I've started using Audible again. I was an earlier user years ago.
Okay, and what are you listening to now?
I'm listening to Moby Dick.
And how many? Okay, so that's how many pages in a row? So that's got to be how many hours?
It's like 800. I don't know how many hours it is. It's a really long book.
Is it good? The movie's coming out soon.
Yeah, I know. No, the book is great. I mean, it's fantastic to listen to and to read.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's great.
Do you listen to it? I mean, you live in New York City. Do you listen to it on commutes? How do you use Audible?
Yeah, I use it in places or experiences when reading it is a kind of a pain. So like on the subway, I kind of hate reading, so I'll just put it in my ears and move pages along.
Super convenient.
Yeah.
If you're commuting,
nice.
Live in New York City, riding the subway. So check it out. Get your free book at audibletrial.com/ambition today to download and listen to any audiobook for free. Not audible.com, but audibletrial.com/ambition today. And now back to this incredible episode of Ambition Today.
You're listening to Ambition Today. Visit us now at siskar.co.
Yeah, they gon' let me for my ambition.
Welcome back. We are here with Justin Dombrowski of Historiocity Tech. So Justin, are you Satoshi Nakamoto, the secret founder of Bitcoin?
No. Then again, if I were, I wouldn't tell you.
Damn. So who is Satoshi Nakamoto?
Satoshi, yeah.
Satoshi Nakamoto. You say it. How do I say it?
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yeah.
He's the secret founder of Bitcoin. No one knows who he is.
Right.
But he set all these motions in place for the next 20 years back in 2007 or 2008?
Yeah, 2007.
So what is he and what do we need to know about him?
Well, I mean, so it seems like from what we know about Satoshi, we don't know whether it was one person or multiple people. We don't know where he, she, or they are from, or whether they're still alive. So in terms of identity, you probably are aware that there's been some controversy as of late about whether some guy, Dr. Wright, is in fact, he seems to be self-professed Satoshi, and everybody thinks there's a hoax about it now.
It seems every few months there's speculation that a new person is Satoshi.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about this, right, is for the most part, the only people who actually care who Satoshi is are journalists who want to be able to say they found out who this guy is. Developers really don't care. So you could ask the question, for instance, right? Oh, well, what would happen if we found out who Satoshi was or Satoshi came forward? And I think the general consensus is that if Satoshi came forward, it wouldn't do much to anything because Satoshi no longer has direct control over the protocol.
Because he basically pressed go in 2007.
And he
Bitcoin was released and it's open source and it's decentralized.
Right. I mean, there are only a handful of people who actually have commit access to change the protocol, and there are changes that need to get made, and we're in the process of trying to make right now. But he basically handed off those controls to other individuals so that he could basically fall into silence, right? Because basically it seems like he wanted the Bitcoin network to be independent of its founders and to be a completely democratized, governance structure so that everybody else could figure out how it's supposed to work.
Well, the thing that's interesting too is every time they think they know who he is, it's not like they just write an article and like, oh, we found him. It's like a manhunt. Like 2 years ago, it was someone and they were chasing the guy all around California, and they went to his house. And
you mean Dorian Nakamoto, that guy?
Yeah.
You know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, some old Japanese guy who's living in California, and I forget who it was, the journalist who was that broke the story, but
he just had the same last name, but he had nothing to do with Bitcoin, right? And
he didn't.
They chased him around all over the city, and
they gave him a really hard time. And I mean, I don't think anybody in the developer community thought that he was the guy. They were interested for one hot second, like, nah, he's probably not it. And even if he were, we don't really care. I mean, this is kind of a thing that's gone on and developed on its own right.
Yeah. This week they think that's this Craig Stephen Wright in Australia, and police raided his home. Is that for tax reasons? Is that another reason?
Yeah, I mean, according to the Australians, the reasons why his house was raided had nothing to do with this proposed association with Satoshi. It had to do with this tax stuff and was going to happen anyway.
It just happened to happen.
Yeah, and to be honest, and to be honest, I've not followed it
closely enough to find out exactly what the tax reasons were. I'm not sure to what extent they disclosed
So that's my
it
next
either.
question. Should we be following this? Should we care, or is Bitcoin bigger than that? Or?
I mean, my own opinion is that I kind of wish these journalists would kind of leave this whole question to the side. Whoever Satoshi was or is, they are, he, she, or they decided that they wanted to be silent for some reason. And I think the general Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin community, has done a good job of trying to keep the spirit of the mission going and make decisions about how the network is going to mature as a financial system or wherever it's going to go. And Satoshi didn't want to have anything to do with it directly anyway after he went into silence. So you expose the person. It's not a very nice thing to do. I mean, he hasn't done anything illegal. The only thing you get out of it at the end of the day is, okay, yeah, you found him. Okay,
Gotcha.
Great. Yeah.
So, Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Why isn't it going away? Why is it not just a one piece, in the Times, and we're done. We're over it. We're on to the next startup or idea. Why is Bitcoin so big, and why is it sticking around?
So, I mean, I think a few reasons. It does provide financial value. I mean, it's not enormous, right? So, I mean, I think right now what they talk about as the market cap of Bitcoin is, I think last I checked, is something like $6 billion. Not enormous, right, in financial terms. But it's got tens of thousands of people doing the mining work of actually processing transactions. There are somewhere around 160 to 180,000 different transactions going around per day. So people are using the network in various ways, and people are using it to send money. There are lots of companies. Remittance companies are the ones that are most usually in the news. But then people are also using the Bitcoin blockchain as a means of doing data management or actually dating different kinds of documents that they create, for record-keeping purposes. So lots of different uses that are going around about it. And so I think there's this general consensus that maybe the future of the Bitcoin blockchain and what it's going to look like down the road isn't entirely clear, but there are actual business cases that are available right now for people to make some money on. And it is more or less self-sustaining. So for that reason alone, it can stick around.
How important will Bitcoin be in emerging markets? Because you mentioned earlier how it's transferring money person to person, peer to peer, free, easy. Yeah. What will the effect be there, do you think?
So I think that's tricky. I mean, there are some people who like to say, "Oh, great! Isn't Bitcoin great for places like sub-Saharan Africa, where inflation rates are like 15% or more, and you could have your own feature phone with something like a Coinbase account and send money back and forth to one another to pay your bills. You never have to deal with the government, blah, blah, blah." That kind of sort of sounds nice, except that at the end of the day, people in those areas still need to have legal tender. And at the end of the day, it's still a very big pain to use feature phones for these kinds of things. So in general, nobody's using Bitcoin or accepting Bitcoin there in and of its own right, at least at the lowest grassroots level, right? At the same time, though, there are companies like BitPesa or even Inventure that will use Bitcoin as a rail to move money around so that they can then sell the Bitcoin and issue fiat loans or just payments or whatever it is to customers, organizations there. So at least for the time being, I don't think there's any good case to make that it's going to reach the bottom. But I think it's probably pretty good for B2B services, cross-border moving of money. Now, I think an open question is what kind of volume can you actually expect in the distant future? And I think that's still very much an open question, whether the network as designed will be able to handle large volumes of money moving or not. At the moment, the answer is no. But we haven't reached the top yet either. So I think time will tell.
So Bitcoin is one of the craziest new things in fintech, I think, in a long time. It's made a big impact. Why is fintech normally slower to advance than other industries? Is it regulations? Is it like what do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on
which area of fintech you're talking about, right? And so the areas that have the lower legal barriers or that have some mechanism to get around them much more efficiently. So I think you could talk about companies like Robinhood, for example, are companies that can advance much more quickly.
Robinhood being a free stock trading app.
Yes, that's right. Can advance much more quickly than, say, a company that, in order to operate, that's a great idea but needs a money service business license. Companies like that normally need their licenses issued state by state, and it costs millions of dollars just to get that licensing moving and to get operational. So part of it is the regulation and the costs associated with actually doing the regulation. Now, if you also, on top of that, have to deal with AML and KYC as a financial technology company, that's also incredibly expensive to do, especially if you mess up. Because if you have someone who's a customer and you should have filed a suspicious activities report on them and you didn't do so, you get sued for an absurd amount of money, millions of dollars by the government. Really understanding what your business proposition is and understanding whether you've got the chops available to you to actually navigate all those waters and get the capital you need is incredibly hard and incredibly slow. Do
you think there's any new advancements or technologies in the next few years you've seen that you're really excited about or is going to be impactful? So, you were talking about Bitcoin earlier. The area where I think for the last year or so that I've been focusing mostly on is ways that you can take this technology, blockchains, and redesign them in ways to meet other kinds of business needs. So right now you have a plethora of startups in the US in particular, but also the UK and elsewhere, that are trying to, that basically try to identify areas where there's limited technical infrastructure, there are huge verticals, or the kinds of technological infrastructures that are there is incredibly dilapidated, needs replacing. And in relationship to that, that something like a specially designed distributed ledger would do a much better job of meeting the industry needs than a traditional centralized database. You can sometimes, so for example... Could you give like a simpler example? So one of the popular ones that everybody's talking about right now is in capital markets, or settling payments, right? So in order to do this process, you have these, like in the case of capital markets, you have to deal with clearinghouses like the DTCC, you have to deal with exchanges and all of that. And so what you end up with, for example, we talk about like the T+3 settlement time. It's incredibly long, it's cumbersome, it's incredibly expensive because you have people actually doing the processes manually, and it takes a full 3 days to make sure that the trade is cleared and that you haven't actually overdrawn on your trading accounts. It costs an awful lot of money. There's an awful amount of counterparty risk. So one of the things that people have talked about doing is saying, well, there is an awful lot of technical infrastructure there already, but it's in principle possible to design distributed ledgers that connect banks to exchanges that deal with that entire process on their own and actually cut out the clearinghouses. And if you do so, all of a sudden you save on overhead costs. It can be much faster. You don't have the counterparty risk. So you don't have to do ACH. You don't have to. It's much easier
for payments. Yeah, like it could be functionally replacing that whole process,
which is kind of archaic.
It is archaic. I don't know anybody who's actually worked in ACH or Swift who thinks it works well and that they like it. They say it works, it does the job, but they're all like, "Oh my god, I hate this damn thing! Like, I wish we could just shoot it and get a new one." And so this is an area where there's capital markets has come much farther along than retail banking has, but it's functionally a very similar problem. Instead of the DTCC, you have correspondent banking, that kind of thing.
All right. I want to jump to the Ambition Today question of the day.
Okay.
So today's Ambition Today question of the day is, what kind of education is most valuable? This kind of follows pretty good on what we talked about earlier.
Yeah. I would say it depends on what you want to do, but I increasingly think that if you're a smart person, you're ambitious, I like that word. Yeah, right? On-the-job training, right? Like identifying, like if you're that kind of person, identify what it is you want to do, network your way into that kind of role, identify the kinds of mentors that you'd need that could help you with that, and make it happen on your own. So learning how to be that kind of person that you want to be from other people, rather than going to just traditional school, because that'll teach you maybe at a conceptual level of the kind of person you want to be, but it won't teach you actually how to do it. So I think that's living life is more important.
Awesome. Pretty good. Solid advice. So I want to thank you for coming on this episode. I think it's been a really good episode. I'm excited, excited about all the lessons in here. Where can people go find out more about you? What do you want to plug?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Historiocity. Cha-ching.
I follow you.
Yeah, thank you. And
posts.
Likewise. I'm there pretty regularly.
Anywhere else?
That's it mainly.
All right, awesome. Well, hopefully I will see you on a future episode of Ambition Today, maybe episode 200 or something. And
Sure.
I'll see you next time on this episode.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Next episode of Ambition Today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ambition Today with your host, Kevin Siskar. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit www.siskar.co. We'll catch you next time.
They gon' love me for my ambition. Beautiful music, painting pictures, this be my vision. They gon' love me for my ambition.